The galaxy was old. It had seen the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations. Great empires had built wonders across 1 million stars and then crumbled to dust. Species had evolved, reached for the heavens, and then vanished into the endless dark. Through it all, the Galactic Council had watched and recorded and judged. They had rules, they had categories, they had labels for everything. And when humanity finally crawled out of their ruined planet and reached the stars 300 years ago, the Council took one look at Earth and gave it a label that made every other species step back in horror. Category 12. The highest rating possible. A planet so dangerous, so brutal, so absolutely hostile to life that the very idea of anything surviving there seemed impossible. Earth had crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, radiation that could kill in hours, predators in every ecosystem, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, natural disasters that reshaped continents. And somehow, humans had not only survived there, they had thrived. They had built cities and civilizations. They had fought each other in terrible wars. They had nearly destroyed themselves in what they called the Great Collapse, and then they had rebuilt from the ashes. The survivors of that dark time were different, harder, stronger. They carried the scars of their world in their bones and their blood. When they finally built ships that could cross the void between stars, the galaxy looked at them and felt something very rare. Fear. The Galactic Council held an emergency meeting. Representatives from 200 species gathered to discuss the human problem. Some wanted to destroy them before they could spread. Others argued for containment. In the end, they chose a middle path. Quarantine. Humanity was given a small section of space at the galaxy's edge. The outer rim, they called it, far from the core worlds, far from the trade routes, far from everything that mattered. The message was clear. Stay in your corner. Do not bother us. We will pretend you do not exist. And humanity remembered. They remembered the silence when their world was dying during the Great Collapse. They remembered crying out for help that never came. They remembered being alone in the dark, struggling to survive while the universe ignored them. So they made a promise. Never again, not for anyone. They built a fleet, not for conquest, not for trade, not for exploration. They built it for one single purpose: to answer the calls that no one else would answer, to go where no one else would go, to save those who had been left to die. They called it the Vigil Fleet. 7 massive dreadnoughts, each one a kilometer long, packed with the deadliest weapons humanity had ever created. Each ship was crewed by volunteers who understood what they were signing up for. They would go into cryogenic sleep at the galaxy's edge. They would drift in the cold darkness between stars. They might never wake up. They might sleep for centuries while the universe moved on without them. But if a distress call came, if someone somewhere cried out for help, they would wake. They would come. They would answer. 12,000 humans climbed into their frozen pods and closed their eyes. The fleet went dark, and the galaxy forgot about them. 142 years passed. Commander was dreaming when the alarm woke her. She was back on Earth in her dream, standing in the ruins of Old Sol, watching the sun set over broken buildings. It was a memory from her childhood, before she joined the military, before she volunteered for the Vigil. The sky was orange and red, and somewhere in the distance she could hear her mother singing. Then the cold hit her like a hammer. Her eyes snapped open. Frost cracked on her eyelashes. Her lungs burned as they filled with air for the first time in over a century. Every muscle in her body screamed as blood began to flow again. The resurrection chamber was filled with blue emergency lights. A synthetic voice was speaking, calm and steady. Priority Alpha distress beacon detected. Origin, Helix Nebula, species. Message content, planetary extinction imminent. All personnel begin revival sequence. Forced herself to move. Her joints cracked. Her skin felt like paper. 142 years of sleep had taken its toll, but she pushed through the pain. She had trained for this. They all had. Around her, other pods were opening. Men and women gasping back to life, coughing up fluid, shaking off the death-like cold of suspended animation. Nobody complained. Nobody hesitated. They had all volunteered for this exact moment. The Vigil was awake, pulled herself to the command console and began reading the data. The distress call was 3 days old. It came from a planet called Prime of the... She knew a little about them from her training. They were an avian species, bird-like beings known for their art and philosophy and music. They had no military. They had no weapons. They believed in peace and beauty and the goodness of the universe. And now something was killing them. The data was incomplete, corrupted by interference, but the images that came through were enough to make blood run cold. Cities burning, ships falling from the sky, strange organic vessels covering the planet like a swarm of insects. The distress call was simple. It was a voice, broken and desperate, speaking in accented common. "Please, if anyone can hear this, please help us. They are killing everyone. We cannot stop them. We cannot run. Please, someone, anyone, help." The voice cut off. Static filled the channel. Stood there for a long moment, staring at the screen. Around her, the command center was filling with officers and crew, all of them shaking off the effects of sleep, all of them looking to her for orders. She was 47 years old. She had gray in her hair and scars on her face from a life spent fighting. She had watched friends die. She had killed enemies without mercy. She had given up everything, family, comfort, a normal life, to sit in the dark and wait. This was what she had waited for. "Status report," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "All 7 ships responding," Lieutenant answered. He was young, barely 30, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "Revival rates at 94%. 6% requiring extended medical attention. All primary systems online. Weapons hot in 30 minutes. The said, "What do we know about the attackers?" Navigator pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. She was a small woman with quick hands and a quicker mind. "Unknown configuration, Commander. The ships don't match anything in the Galactic Council database. They appear to be organic, living vessels." A murmur ran through the command center. Living ships, that meant only one thing. "The Harrow," someone whispered. Felt her jaw tighten. The Harrow were a legend, a nightmare story that older species told to frighten their young. They were supposed to have been extinct for 10,000 years, wiped out by a coalition of ancient races who had sacrificed everything to stop them. The Harrow did not conquer. They did not enslave. They consumed. They arrived at a planet, stripped it of all life, erased every trace of the civilization that had lived there and moved on. They were extinction made flesh. And they were back. "How long until we can jump?" asked. 6 hours to full combat readiness, replied. "Make it 4. Opened a channel to all 7 ships. 12,000 humans stopped what they were doing and listened. "This is Commander of the Eternal Dawn," she said. 142 years ago, we made a promise. We said that no one would ever be alone in the dark again. Today, we keep that promise. They are dying. Something ancient and terrible is killing them, and we are the only ones who can help." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I will not lie to you. This will be the hardest fight of our lives. Many of us will not survive, but we did not volunteer for the vigil because we wanted to live forever. We volunteered because we believe that some things are worth dying for." She thought of the voice on the distress call, the desperation, the fading hope. The galaxy forgot we existed. They put us in a corner and pretended we were not there. Today, we remind them why they should be grateful that we are on their side. Prepare for combat. We jump in 4 hours. She closed the channel. Around her, the crew moved with purpose. Weapons were loaded. Systems were checked. Coordinates were plotted. The Vigil fleet came alive, 7 massive dreadnoughts waking from their long sleep, ready to do what they were built to do. Stepped up beside, his face pale but determined. "Commander, the odds are not good, if the Harrow are really back." "I know," said quietly, "but someone called for help and we answer. That is who we are." She looked out at the stars, cold and distant and uncaring. "That is who we have always been." 4 hours later, the Vigil fleet tore 7 holes in the fabric of spacetime and vanished into the light. Behind them, the darkness closed in, empty and silent. But not for long. They were coming. The jump through hyperspace lasted 12 minutes. For the crew of the Vigil fleet, those 12 minutes felt like hours. Every person on every ship knew what was waiting for them on the other side. They had all seen the images from the distress call. They had all heard the desperate voice begging for salvation. Now they were about to face the nightmare that had haunted the galaxy for 10,000 years. Navigator watched the countdown on her console. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding against her ribs. She had joined the Vigil because she wanted to make a difference. She wanted to be part of something bigger than herself. Now, as the numbers dropped toward 0, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. 30 seconds to emergence, she announced. Commander stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the main. The swirling colors of hyperspace filled the display, beautiful and strange. In a few moments, those colors would be replaced by something far less beautiful. "All hands brace for combat," she said calmly. "We do not know what we will find. Be ready for anything." The countdown reached 0. The eternal dawn burst out of hyperspace, followed by its 6 sister ships. For a single heartbeat, there was silence. Then the sensors came online, and everyone on the bridge saw what was waiting for them. Prime was dying. The planet hung in space like a wounded animal, its surface covered in massive scars. What had once been cities were now perfect circles of ash and glass, burned so hot that the ground itself had melted. Forests that had taken millions of years to grow were gone, replaced by gray wastelands. The oceans were boiling, sending columns of steam into the poisoned atmosphere. And surrounding the dying world were the ships. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were unlike anything had ever seen. Each vessel was organic, a twisted mass of chitin and membrane and pulsing red veins. They looked like insects. They looked like cancer. They looked like death given form. "Mother of Earth," someone whispered. Forced herself to count. Her training took over, turning horror into data. 412 hostile vessels confirmed, Commander. Estimated fighter complement, 15,000. They have orbital supremacy. "What about survivors?" asked. Scanning, worked her console, searching for any sign of life on the ravaged planet below. "I'm detecting. Yes, underground bunkers, multiple locations. Life signs are maybe 10,000 survivors." 10,000, out of a population of 3 billion. His face did not change, but her knuckles went white as she gripped the railing in front of her. "Can we extract them?" "Not while those ships are in orbit," Lieutenant said. He had moved to the tactical station, where holographic displays showed the enemy positions. "They have the planet surrounded. Any rescue attempt would be cut to pieces." "Then we clear them out first." Looked at her. "Commander, we are outnumbered 40-1. Our ships are powerful, but these odds are the odds we trained for." Finished. "The Harrow have never fought before. They have never fought humans. Today they learn what that means." A new alert sounded. The enemy had detected them. Dozens of the organic ships were turning toward the human fleet. They moved with a horrible grace, like predators scenting blood. Then a transmission came through, not on any standard communication channel, but directly into the minds of everyone on the bridge. It was not words. It was a feeling, a psychic pulse of pure contempt and hunger and absolute certainty. The message needed no translation. "You are prey, you are nothing. Leave now or be consumed." Several crew members stumbled, clutching their heads. One junior officer fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the alien intrusion, but stood firm. She had faced worse than psychic threats. She had survived the training programs that broke weaker minds. She had walked through hell and come out the other side. "Get out of my head," she said through gritted teeth, and somehow impossibly the presence. She turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel, all frequencies, let them hear me." The officer nodded, his face pale but determined. "Channel open, Commander." Stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was broadcast across the void, reaching every ship in the system. "This is Commander of the Terran Vigil Fleet. We have received a distress call from the people of Prime. We are here to answer that call. To the forces attacking this world, you will stop your assault immediately. You will withdraw from this system. You will allow us to evacuate the survivors. This is your only warning." Silence. The Harrow ships continued to advance. Then the response came. Not words, but laughter. A horrible, chittering sound that echoed through the communication systems of every human ship. The Harrow found the warning amusing. They had destroyed civilizations that spanned galaxies. They had consumed species that had mastered technologies beyond human understanding. What could 7 ships from a quarantine zone possibly do? Smiled, it was not a pleasant expression. "Gunnery Chief Minu," she said, "show them." Minu was a giant of a man, more machine than flesh after decades of combat implants. His hands flew across the weapon's console with surprising grace. "Target locked, Commander. Main battery charged." "Fire." The Eternal Dawn's primary weapon was an antimatter lance. It was designed to crack open planets, to tear through the heaviest armor, to destroy anything that got in its way. When it fired, a beam of concentrated annihilation shot across the void and struck the nearest Harrow vessel. The organic ship did not explode, it screamed. The sound was broadcast on every frequency, a psychic wail of agony that made humans wince and Harrow vessels pause in confusion. The targeted ship began to come apart, its organic hull dissolving, its red veins going dark. In seconds, nothing remained but floating debris. Across the fleet, 12,000 humans watched the first Harrow die, and something ancient and primal woke up inside them. They had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters. They had nearly destroyed themselves, and then they had risen from the ashes stronger than before. They were not prey. They were predators. "All ships," commanded, "weapons free, no survivors." The Vigil fleet surged forward. On the bridge of the Captain Sora watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. She was older then, a veteran of the colonial wars before the quarantine. She had thought those fighting days were behind her. Now, seeing the Harrow ships scramble to respond to the human attack, she felt young again. "Focus fire on the larger vessels," she ordered. "Break their formation, don't let them coordinate." The guns roared to life, joining the chorus of destruction that filled the void. On the Iron Promise, Gunnery Chief Minu's counterpart, a woman named, led her crew with cold efficiency. Each shot was calculated. Each target was prioritized. They did not waste ammunition. They did not miss. "Hostile vessel disabled," she reported, moving to next target. The Harrow were not prepared for this. For 10,000 years, they had been the ultimate predators. They had never faced resistance that did not crumble. They had never encountered a species that fought with such absolute ferocity. The human ships were taking damage. The Harrow adapted quickly, their organic weapons finding weak points in the human armor. On the last light, a breach opened in the lower deck, venting atmosphere into space. The crew sealed it with their own bodies, forming a human wall while engineers welded plates over the hole. On the Unbroken, a Harrow boarding pod punched through the hull. Creatures poured out, nightmares of chitin and blade and hunger. They expected easy prey. They found Marines with plasma rifles and powered armor, men and women who had trained for exactly this moment. Sergeant led the defense, her voice cutting through the chaos. Hold the line. Do not let them reach the reactor. She was not tall. She was not particularly strong. But she had spent 15 years learning how to kill things that wanted to kill her, and the Harrow were just the latest in a long line of threats she had faced. A Harrow drone lunged at her. She shot it in the face, stepped over its twitching body, and kept moving. "Push them back," she shouted. "Push them back to their pod." The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell. Human soldiers died. But for every loss, they took 10 times as many Harrow with them. The organic fleet was being torn apart by creatures they had dismissed as insignificant. On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, watched the tide of battle slowly turn. The Harrow were beginning to pull back, regrouping around their largest vessels. They were no longer attacking. They were defending. "Commander," said, his voice tight with exhaustion and hope, "they're retreating." "No," replied, "they're regrouping. The Harrow don't retreat. They've never had to learn how." She studied the display, looking for the pattern. "They're protecting something. Their command ship. Find it." Worked her console. "There, that vessel in the center. It's larger than the others. Different configuration. I'm reading massive energy signatures." "That's their brain," said. "Cut off the head and the body dies." She opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, new target, were going to kill their leader. The Vigil fleet reformed. 5 surviving dreadnoughts pointing their weapons at the heart of the Harrow swarm. Around them, the enemy ships swarmed and screamed and tried to stop them. They failed. The humans were coming, and nothing in the galaxy was going to stop them. The Battle of Prime would be remembered as the most violent engagement in recorded galactic history. Later, when scholars studied the records and analyzed the tactics, they would struggle to understand how 7 ships had fought against 401. They would create theories and models and simulations, trying to explain the impossible. But those scholars had never met humans. They did not understand what it meant to come from a. They did not know that for humans, the impossible was just another challenge to overcome. The Vigil fleet pushed deeper into the Harrow formation, every ship taking damage, every crew fighting with desperate intensity. The enemy outnumbered them 40-1. The enemy could regenerate their wounds, birth new attack drones in the middle of combat, adapt their tactics within minutes. None of it mattered. On the medical deck of the doctor worked in a surgery bay slick with blood. Red human blood. Blue blood from the few survivors they had managed to rescue during brief windows in the battle. The air smelled of burned flesh and antiseptic and fear. A young ensign came through on a stretcher, half his face destroyed by a Harrow energy weapon. His one remaining eye focused on as she examined his wounds. "Just patch me up, Doc," he said, his voice slurred by pain and shock. "My gun crew needs me." Looked at the readings on her scanner. The damage was severe. By any reasonable medical standard, this man should be unconscious. He should be screaming. Instead, he was trying to get back to his post. "You've lost an eye," she said. "Possibly permanent brain damage. You need surgery." "Can you do it in 10 minutes?" "It would take hours." "Then give me a patch and send me back." She sedated him instead. It was the only way to keep him still long enough to save his life. Then she sedated 3 more soldiers who tried to crawl back to their stations with broken bones and internal bleeding. One woman had a piece of shrapnel the size of a fist embedded in her shoulder, and she complained that was wasting time that could be spent on other patients. This was what it meant to be human. This was the legacy. They did not know how to give up. They did not understand the concept of acceptable losses. Every person on these ships had volunteered to die for strangers they had never met, and now that death was staring them in the face, they ran toward it instead of away. Elsewhere on the fleet, that spirit manifested in countless acts of impossible courage. On the Iron Promise, A Harrow boarding pod punched through the engineering section. The creatures inside were larger than the standard drones, elite warriors bred for close combat. They tore through the first line of defenders like paper, their bladed limbs cutting through armor and flesh with terrible efficiency. Engineering Chief saw them coming. He was 53 years old, a veteran of 3 wars and countless smaller conflicts. He had more cybernetic implants than original body parts, the result of injuries that would have killed anyone who lacked human stubbornness. Behind him, his engineering team was desperately trying to repair a damaged power coupling. If the coupling failed, the ship would lose main power. If the ship lost main power in the middle of this battle, everyone would die. He did the math in his head. The Harrow would reach his team in 30 seconds. The repairs would take 2 minutes. 30 seconds was not enough time. "Keep working," he told his team. "I'll buy you time." He picked up a welding torch in one hand and a pistol in the other. Then he walked toward the Harrow. They came at him in a wave of chitin and hunger. He shot the first one in what passed for its face. He shot the second one in its center mass, watching it stumble and fall. The third one reached him before he could fire again, its blade swinging toward his throat. He caught the blade with his cybernetic arm. The metal screamed as it was cut, but it held long enough for him to jam the welding torch into the creature's eye. It died thrashing and burning and stepped over its body to face the next one. He killed 9 Harrow drones before they overwhelmed him. He was still fighting when the 10th one drove its blade through his chest. Even then, even as his vision went dark and his systems began to fail, he kept his body between the enemy and his team. He died smiling. The coupling was repaired. The Iron Promise lived, because one man decided that his life was worth less than his duty. On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, Commander received the casualty reports with a face of stone. The Unbroken was gone, its reactor breached by concentrated Harrow fire. The last light was crippled, barely able to maneuver, its surviving crew fighting off boarders on every deck. 3,000 humans dead, more dying every minute. And they were winning. The Harrow command ship loomed ahead, a massive organic structure that dwarfed even the human dreadnoughts. It was the brain of the swarm, the node that coordinated the actions of every lesser vessel. Kill it, and the Harrow fleet would fall into chaos. But the command ship was surrounded by a wall of defenders, hundreds of organic vessels forming a living shield around their leader. Getting through that wall would cost lives, many lives. "Status on the Unbroken survivors?" asked. "Escape pods launched," reported. "The is covering their recovery." And the last light hesitated. "Captain is requesting permission to ram the command ship, Commander. He says his engines are still functional. He can make it through their defensive line." Closed her eyes. Captain was an old friend. They had served together before the vigil, had shared drinks and stories and dreams of a future where humanity was more than a quarantined mistake. Now he was offering to sacrifice himself and his crew to end this battle. She wanted to say no. She wanted to find another way, but there was no other way. The Harrow were too many, too strong, too determined. Without a decisive blow, the battle would become a war of attrition, and humanity could not win that war. "How many crew still aboard?" she asked. 1,200, said quietly, none of them willing to evacuate. 1,200 people, 1,200 lives. Opened a channel to the last light. His face appeared on the screen. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and the bridge behind him was filled with smoke and damage. But he was smiling. "I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" "You're going to tell me there's another way. You're going to try to save us." He shook his head. "There isn't another way. You know it. I know it. My crew knows it. We talked about it. We voted. Everyone who stayed chose to stay." His throat tightened. "There has to be." "There isn't." His voice was gentle. "Listen to me. We came here to save people, to answer a call that no one else would answer. If we die doing that, then we die well. That's all any of us ever wanted. A good death. A meaningful death." He leaned forward. "Tell the galaxy what we did here. Tell them that when the call for help humans came. Tell them that we kept our promise." Nodded, she could not speak. "Last light out," said. "Give them hell, Commander." The channel closed. On the tactical display, watched the last light accelerate. Its engines flared to maximum power, pushing the damaged ship faster than it had ever moved before. The Harrow defenders tried to stop it. They threw everything they had at the charging dreadnought. It was not enough. The last light hit the command ship at full speed. The collision was visible across the entire system, a flash of light so bright that sensors had to filter it to prevent damage. When the light faded, both ships were gone. Debris scattered across the void like fallen leaves. 1,200 humans, dead in an instant. And the Harrow fleet began to scream. Without the command ship, the organic vessels lost their coordination. They stopped moving in formation. They started attacking each other. They fled in random directions, their primitive individual minds unable to function without the guiding intelligence that had controlled them. "The swarm is breaking," reported, his voice hoarse. "They're in chaos." Straightened, the grief would come later. For now, there was work to do. "All ships," she commanded. "Push, push now. Don't let them regroup. Don't let them escape for the last light, for the unbroken, for everyone we've lost. End this." The surviving human ships surged forward, weapons blazing. They hunted the scattered Harrow with cold efficiency, destroying them one by one, making sure that none would escape to threaten another world. The battle lasted 6 more hours. By the end, not a single Harrow vessel remained in the system. The Vigil fleet had won. The cost was terrible: 2 ships destroyed, thousands dead. The survivors were exhausted, wounded, traumatized by what they had seen and done. But they had kept their promise. They had answered the call. On the surface of Prime, 10,000 looked up at the sky and saw human ships descending through the smoke and ash. Rescue shuttles, medical teams, supplies. Help had come. For the first time in days, the survivors allowed themselves to hope. News of the Battle of Prime spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every major communication network was carrying the story. Within days, it was all anyone talked about. The Harrow had returned. The Harrow had been defeated, and the species that had defeated them were the quarantined from the Outer Rim. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. 200 species sent their representatives to the Great Chamber on the capital world of Nexus Prime. They came from every corner of known space, beings of every shape and size and color, united by a shared sense of shock and fear and wonder. Called the session to order. He was a tall reptilian species known for their wisdom and their long memories. He had served on the council for over 3 centuries, and in all that time, he had never seen anything like the footage he was about to show. "Fellow," he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber, "what you are about to see comes from recovered sensor data and surviving witnesses. I warn you, it is disturbing." The central display activated. Images filled the air above the council floor. The Harrow fleet, vast and terrible, the burning surface of Prime, the 7 human ships emerging from hyperspace. And then the battle. They watched in silence as the human fleet charged into the heart of the Harrow swarm. They saw antimatter lances tearing through organic hulls. They saw boarding actions where human soldiers fought hand-to-hand with nightmares. They saw the last light ram the command ship, sacrificing 1,200 lives to break the enemy's coordination. When the footage ended, no one spoke. The chamber was silent except for the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional rustle of alien bodies shifting uncomfortably. Finally, from the collective raised a tendril. "Is this accurate, unedited?" "It is," confirmed. Multiple sources have the data. The battle happened exactly as shown. But that's impossible, another said. She was a small being with large eyes and delicate limbs. The humans are a quarantined species, Category 12. We restricted their technology. We limited their expansion. How could they build ships like this, weapons like this? Apparently, said dryly, we underestimated them. A representative stepped forward. Her name was, and she was one of only 8,000 survivors from Prime. Her feathers were singed and damaged, and she walked with a limp from injuries sustained during the attack, but her voice was strong. You speak of them as if they are a threat, she said. You wonder how they became so powerful, but you miss the point. The humans did not come to conquer. They did not come for territory or resources or political advantage. They came because we asked for help. She looked around the chamber, her large eyes meeting the gazes of from species that had ignored the distress call. We are nobody, she continued. We have no military power. We have no strategic value. We are artists and philosophers and dreamers. When the hero came, we knew no one would save us. We sent our distress call not because we expected rescue, but because we wanted someone to know we had existed. We wanted our deaths to be witnessed. Her voice cracked, but she kept speaking. And then the humans came. They crossed the entire galaxy. They fought against impossible odds. They lost thousands of their own people. For us. For strangers they had never met. Because 140 years ago they made a promise that no one would ever be alone in the dark. She spread her damaged wings. You want to know what the humans are? They are the species that answered when everyone else stayed silent. They are the ones who came when no one else would come. And now you sit here debating whether they are dangerous. Turned to leave, then paused. Perhaps they are dangerous. Perhaps we should all be grateful that they chose to use that danger to protect the innocent instead of to destroy them. She walked out of the chamber. The doors closed behind her with a soft sound that seemed very loud in the silence. On the surface of Prime, the cleanup and rescue operations continued. Sergeant had not slept in 3 days. She had gone from combat to rescue without stopping, helping survivors dig through the ruins of their cities, searching for anyone who might still be alive. Her armor was dented and scratched. Her muscles ached. Her mind was foggy with exhaustion. But she kept working. A small child followed her through the ruins of what had once been a school. The child was young, barely old enough to walk steadily, her feathers still the fluffy down of youth. She had been found hiding in a collapsed basement, the only survivor of her entire family. Did not know how to talk to children. She had never had any of her own. But this child seemed to have adopted her, following her everywhere, watching her with large, curious eyes. Why? The child asked suddenly. Paused in her work. Why what? Why did you come? The child's comment was broken and accented but understandable. Everyone said no one would come. Everyone said we would die, but you came. Why? Sat down on a piece of rubble. She was so tired. Her whole body felt heavy. The question deserved an answer, but finding the right words was hard. A long time ago, she said slowly, my world was dying. My people had a war, a terrible war. We destroyed our cities. We poisoned our air and water. Billions of people died. And when it was happening, when we were crying out for help, no one came. The child listened, her small head tilted. We survived, continued. We rebuilt. We became strong again, but we never forgot that feeling, the feeling of being alone, of calling for help and hearing nothing but silence. She looked at the child. So we made a promise. We said that if we ever had the power to help someone, we would, no matter how far away, no matter how dangerous, no matter what it cost, because we know what it feels like to be abandoned, and we will not let anyone else feel that way if we can stop it. The child did not fully understand. She was too young to grasp the weight of history and sacrifice and determination that was describing, but she understood enough. She walked forward and wrapped her small arms around his leg. She hugged her tightly and began to cry. Did not know what to do. She sat there, awkward and uncertain, while a child she could not save sobbed against her. After a moment, she reached down and gently patted the child's back. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're safe now, we're here, we'll stay as long as you need us." 3 days later, the Galactic Council finished their deliberations and announced their decision. The quarantine on humanity was lifted. Earth and the human colonies were granted full membership in the Council. Trade routes were opened. Diplomatic relations were established. The isolation that had defined humanity's place in the galaxy for 300 years was over. But the Council did not stop there. They had a request. The Harrow had been defeated at Prime, but they had not been destroyed. Somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, more of them waited. The ancient enemy would return, and when they did, the galaxy needed to be ready. "We ask humanity," said in his formal announcement, "to share their knowledge, their tactics, their weapons. We ask them to help us build a defense against the threat that nearly destroyed the. We ask them to become our shield against the darkness." The human ambassador, a woman named, received the request with a calm expression. She was young for an ambassador, barely 40, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst the universe could offer and refused to be impressed. "The Council spent 300 years treating humanity like a disease to be contained," she said. "You put us in a corner and hoped we would disappear. Now you ask us to protect you." Nodded. "Yes, we were wrong, we admit this freely. We looked at your world and saw only danger. We did not see what they saw, we did not see courage and sacrifice and honor." He bowed his long reptilian head. "We ask for your help, not because we deserve it, but because you are the kind of species that helps anyway." Was silent for a long moment, then she smiled. "You're right," she said, "we are." She stood up. "Tell the Council that humanity accepts. We will share what we know. We will help train your militaries. We will build new ships and new weapons. And the next time the Harrow come, they will face not 7 ships, but 700, 7,000. They will face a galaxy that has learned to stand together." Her smile faded, replaced by something harder. "And they will learn what humanity learned long ago, that the darkness is not something to fear. It is something to conquer." The announcement was broadcast across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every species watched and listened. Many were relieved, some were skeptical, a few were afraid. But on Earth and on the human colonies scattered across the outer rim, people smiled. They had been outcasts for so long. They had been feared and hated and ignored. Now, finally, they had a chance to show the galaxy what they really were. Not monsters, not threats, not something to be quarantined. Protectors, guardians, the ones who would answer when the darkness called. In that year, everything had changed. The galaxy that had once feared and ignored humanity now looked to them with hope and desperation. The Harrow were coming back. Everyone knew it. The creatures that had nearly wiped out though were gathering their strength in the darkness between stars, preparing for a war of extinction. But the galaxy was no longer unprepared. The Vigil fleet had grown. The original 7 dreadnoughts had been reduced to 5 after the battle, but now they were joined by 30 more. Massive shipyards orbited Earth and the colony worlds, working day and night to build new vessels. Funding came from every corner of the galaxy, from species that had once wanted nothing to do with the quarantined. And the crews were no longer entirely human. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn II, watching the new fleet assemble through the main. Behind her, Captain reviewed the latest intelligence reports on a holographic display. He had been promoted after the battle, his actions during the desperate fight earning him recognition and responsibility. They had both aged in the past year. His hair was more gray than black now, and lines had deepened around her eyes, but her gaze was still sharp, still determined. She had lost too many people to stop now. "How many ships total?" she asked. 37 dreadnoughts, replied, 200 support vessels, fighter squadrons from 12 different species, total combat personnel, approximately 150,000. It was an impressive number. A year ago, such a fleet would have been unthinkable. Now it was barely enough. The harrow numbers. His expression darkened. Our scouts report thousands of vessels gathering at the Obsidian Rift, more than we've ever seen. They're not launching random attacks anymore. They're organizing, concentrating their forces. "They're coming for Earth," said. It was not a question. "Yes, Admiral, our analysts believe so. We humiliated them at Prime, destroyed their command ship, killed their swarm intelligence. The harrow, don't forget, they don't forgive, they want revenge." Nodded slowly. She had expected this. From the moment the last light rammed the harrow command ship, she had known that the enemy would return. The victory at Prime had not ended the war. It had only delayed it. But delay was what they had needed. Time to build, time to train, time to prepare. A communication request appeared on the display. Accepted it, and the face of Commander appeared on the screen. She had been promoted as well, given command of the medical frigate Mercy's Hand. Her job was to keep the fleet alive through whatever was coming. "Admiral," said, "all medical teams are standing by. We have supplies for extended combat operations. Field hospitals are prepped on every major vessel. Casualties will be high," warned. "I know," his face was calm but serious. "We're ready." The channel closed. Another opened immediately, showing the face of the young gunnery officer who had replaced Chief Menu after his death at Prime. She had trained under him during her early years in the fleet, learning everything he knew about weapons and tactics and staying alive in impossible situations. "Weapon systems fully operational," Admiral reported. "All batteries charged, targeting systems calibrated. We're ready to make them pay." Allowed herself a small smile. "Good, stand by for combat orders." The fleet continued to gather. Human dreadnoughts formed the core of the formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. Around them flew support ships, their graceful lines a contrast to the brutal human designs. They had sworn life debts to their rescuers, and thousands of them had volunteered to crew these vessels. Other species had joined as well. The collective sent a squadron of heavy cruisers. The Federation contributed sensor ships and electronic warfare platforms. Even the Proud, who had led the effort to quarantine humanity centuries ago, had committed vessels to the defense. In the cargo bay of the Sergeant addressed a company of mixed-species Marines. Humans stood shoulder to shoulder with end-end. A year ago, such a sight would have been impossible. Now it was normal. "Listen up," said. Her voice was rough and commanding, the voice of someone who had led soldiers through hell and expected to do it again. "The harrow think they're the top of the food chain. They think they can eat anything they want and no one can stop them. They've spent 10,000 years believing that." She paused, looking at the faces before her. Different species, different worlds, different histories, but all of them here now, ready to fight and die together. "Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show them what happens when you threaten people under our protection. Today, we teach them that there are things in this galaxy more dangerous than they are." A human Marine near the front grinned. "What things, Sergeant?" Smiled back. It was not a kind smile. "Us." The alarm sounded across the fleet. The harrow had arrived. Admiral watched the enemy emerge from hyperspace on the tactical display. Thousands of organic vessels, their red veins pulsing with malevolent energy. They spread across the void like a disease, blocking out the stars. At the center of the swarm was a ship larger than anything they had seen before. A new command vessel, grown to replace the one destroyed at Prime. It was the size of a small moon, covered in weapons and armor and birthing pods that could spawn new ships in the middle of battle. The Harrow were not underestimating humanity this time. They had brought everything they had. "All hands," announced, her voice broadcast to every ship in the fleet. "This is Admiral. 1 year ago, we answered a distress call and fought a battle that should have killed us all. We won because we refused to give up, because we cared more about saving others than saving ourselves, because we are and giving up is not in our nature." She stood straight, her eyes fixed on the enemy formation. "Today, the Harrow have come to our doorstep. They want revenge for what we did to them. They want to destroy us, and then they want to destroy everyone who stood with us. Earth, the colonies, every species that dared to hope that the darkness could be beaten." Her voice hardened. "They are wrong, they have always been wrong. The darkness is not our enemy. We were born in darkness. We grew strong in darkness. We do not fear it, we own it." On the enemy formation, the massive command vessel began to advance. The swarm moved with it, a wall of death rolling toward the Allied fleet. "The galaxy is watching," said. "Our friends are watching. Our enemies are watching. Everyone wants to know if the stories about humanity are true, if we really are the monsters that the Council feared, if we really are the guardians that they believe us to be." She smiled. "Let's show them what do when someone threatens their family." The Allied fleet surged forward. Human dreadnoughts led the charge, their weapons blazing. Support ships provided cover fire and electronic jamming. Cruisers targeted the largest enemy vessels. Scouts identified weak points in the enemy formation and broadcast targeting data to the entire fleet. The Harrow responded with overwhelming force. Thousands of ships engaged the Allied formation, their organic weapons tearing into shields and armor. Boarding pods launched in waves, carrying drones that wanted nothing more than to kill and consume. The battle was chaos. Ships exploded. Soldiers died. The void filled with debris and energy weapons fire and the screams of the dying. But the Allies did not break. On the Sergeant led her mixed-species Marines against a Harrow boarding party. Humans and fought side by side, their different shapes and sizes working together in ways the enemy had never faced before. A soldier saves life, diving in front of a Harrow blade meant for her throat. Returned the favor moments later, shooting a drone that was about to tear the apart. They nodded at each other and kept fighting. On the medical frigate Mercy's Hand, Commander performed surgery on an officer while the ship shook from enemy fire. This biology was completely different from human anatomy, but had spent the past year learning. She had trained herself to save every species she might encounter. "You're going to be fine," she told just hold on. The patient gripped her hand with a tentacle. "Thank you, human." On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn II, Admiral watched the battle unfold. The Allies were taking heavy losses, but they were giving as good as they got, and the Harrow were not prepared for an enemy that fought with such coordination and determination. "The command ship," she said. "Can we reach it?" Captain studied the tactical display. "It's heavily defended, Admiral, but if we concentrate our forces on a single point in their line." "Do it. All dreadnoughts focus fire on Sector 7. Create a path to the command ship." The human dreadnoughts turned their weapons on a single point in the Harrow formation. 37 ships fired simultaneously, their combined firepower punching a hole through the enemy line. The Harrow tried to close the gap, but they were too slow. The Eternal Dawn II accelerated through the opening, followed by its escort ships. Ahead, the command vessel loomed like a mountain of flesh and malice. "Target the central node," ordered. "All weapons, everything we have." The dreadnought's guns roared. Antimatter lances and plasma cannons and missile salvos struck the command ship, tearing through its organic armor. The massive vessel screamed, its psychic wail echoing through the minds of everyone in the system. But it did not die. It was too large, too powerful. It began to regenerate, closing its wounds even as new ones were inflicted. "We need more firepower," said. looked at the display. The Allied fleet was fully engaged, every ship fighting for survival. There were no reserves, no reinforcements. Then a new signature appeared on sensors, a ship emerging from hyperspace, then another, then a dozen more. The rescue fleet had arrived. Ships that had been evacuating survivors from Prime had finished their mission and come to join the battle. They were not warships. They were transports and medical frigates and supply vessels. But they came anyway. Admiral, the commander's voice came over the communication channel. We are not fighters, but we can do one thing. We can ram. His throat tightened. You don't have to do this. You came for us when no one else would. Now it is our turn. The ships accelerated toward the command vessel. They were not armed. They had no weapons, but they had engines and they had determination, and they had learned from humanity that sometimes the only way to win was to sacrifice everything. The first ship struck the command vessel's central node at full speed, then the second, then the third. Each impact tore deeper into the organic structure, weakening it further. Finish it, whispered. Honor their sacrifice, finish it. The Eternal Dawn II fired its main weapon one final time. The antimatter lance struck the command vessel's exposed core. The explosion was visible across the entire system. When the light faded, the Harrow command ship was gone, and without it, the swarm fell apart. Ships that had been coordinated killing machines became confused animals, easy prey for the Allied forces. The battle lasted 3 more hours. By the end, the Harrow were broken. Scattered survivors fled into the darkness between galaxies, and this time, no one pursued them. There was no need. The enemy had been defeated so completely that they would never threaten anyone again. The war was over. 1 century later, a young stood before a monument on the rebuilt surface of Prime. The statue depicted a human woman in military uniform, her hand extended toward the stars. Admiral had not survived to see the victory. She had died on the bridge of her ship during the final assault, giving the orders that turned the tide. But her legacy endured. Below the statue, an inscription was carved in 100 languages. You called, we came. This is the promise of humanity. No one dies alone in the dark. The Vigil fleet still patrolled the galaxy's edge. Its crews came from every species that had learned to stand together. And somewhere in the cold silence between stars, the next distress signal was waiting. When it came, the fleet would answer. They always would. Because that was the promise. And humanity always kept its promises.